This is a summary of Dr. Andrew Huberman's Huberman Lab podcast episode featuring Dr. Christopher Gardner titled How Different Diets Impact Your Health. And just to get straight into the summary, in short, there is no universal best diet. Human dietary adaptability is vast, and different cultures have thrived on radically different diets. However, the worst diet, by evidence, is the modern, highly processed standard American diet. This is mainly because of the over-excessive amounts of processed packaged foods that the majority of Americans consume on a daily basis. It is also important to consider that diet responses are individual. Some thrive on vegan, others on animal-based, and this is due to genetics, ancestry, and other unmeasured factors. But the key lesson here is that there is no one-size-fits-all diet. But there is a one diet hurts all diet, and that is highly processed packaged foods. Food quality trumps macronutrient debates, meaning focusing purely on macronutrients, so carbs, fats, and proteins, misses the bigger picture. Sources, processing, and nutrient density matters equivalently more. For example, take a look at this model of meat A and meat B, both of which providing you with the same amount of protein. Meat A comes from a cow, but not just any cow. This cow has been fed heavily processed grains and exposed to harmful chemicals. And when the farmers finally extract the products from the cow, so meat, milk, etc., those products are heavily processed with additives, preservatives, and packaged in plastic. While on the other hand, meat B comes from a healthy, grass-fed, grass-finished cow that has been kept in a safe environment, and its products stay intact and avoided any heavy processing. So yes, both meats do contain the same amount of protein, but the quality of that protein arguably matters more because of the underlying effects that come from the sourcing, processing, and nutrient density. The quality of foods is also something that is universally known within different literature because the best outcome studies compare high-quality versions of different diets, not just superficial terms like low-carb versus low-fat in general. The NOVA system classifies foods by degree of processing, not just nutrient content. Cosmetic additives like dyes, emulsifiers, and texturizers are deeply pervasive and poorly studied, and are also one of the main reasons why processed foods are so detrimental for us. Now, you may be thinking that the solution to this processed foods crisis is simply putting a ban or eliminating these foods entirely. However, removing all processed foods would instantly harm people who rely on them for affordability and access. This is why a more practical solution would just call for reformulation, not mass elimination. In fact, many processed foods in Europe and North America differ only by ingredient list. Stricter rules and regulations are possible and are even practiced in different countries. And so something that we could do as a society is encouraging American manufacturers to reformulate using known, safe, and fewer ingredients, which is done in many other European countries. And so industry fundings isn't always corrupt, but bias is actually a real thing. Funding source and researcher bias can subtly or not so subtly shape study design and outcomes. This is why rigorous transparency is so important. A modern practice that researchers could implement include pre-registered trials, publicly post methods, third-party analysis, and open data to reduce bias. And if you are someone that reads scientific literature, it is important to read beyond the headlines, which just means to evaluate study design and what's being compared, not just the source of funding. If the food we eat is not delicious and tastes good, it won't matter how healthy it is. Because I'm sure that we could both agree that we'd rather eat a bowl of ice cream with zero nutritional value over a bowl of bugs that is loaded with protein and nutrients. This is a perfect example of how no matter how healthy or nutrient dense the food is, people won't eat it if it doesn't taste good. This also sheds light on how institutional food reform via hospitals, schools, and businesses and chef collaborations really hold the key to population-level dietary change. It is also important to listen to your body. If you find a sustainable, high-quality diet that works for your health and taste buds, stick with it. Health improvements come more from eliminating ultra-processed foods and finding a diet that you could realistically adhere to than tweaking macro ratios. So don't ignore your own digestion, energy, and satiety signals. Here is a practical framework that Dr. Christopher Gardner recommends. Prioritize whole, minimally processed foods. Aim for a protein flip, which means making quality plant foods the centerpiece with animal foods as flavor/condiments, unless you need or want more. Regularly include low sugar fermented foods and build up fiber gradually. Focus on taste. Seek cookbooks, chef inspirations, or food communities. Consider environmental impact, but don't martyr affordability or enjoyment. Scientists largely agree that influencers create controversy among diet and nutrition for clicks more than for truth. Behavioral and systemic change is more powerful than individual willpower, meaning upstream interventions are more effective than purely educational campaigns. Processed meat alternatives like Beyond Meat or Impossible Meat show cardiometabolic benefits versus cheap industrial meat, but other high-quality protein sources are still better. U.S. packaged foods often contain more additives than their European versions, and reformulation is possible with regulation. Plant proteins aren't missing essential amino acids, and it's the total intake and diversity that matters most. And so to basically summarize this summary, basically the one thing that you need to do is just find your optimal pattern through personal experimentation. But the one thing that you should do is just remove most processed foods and to emphasize food quality, taste, and variety. Also, if you do only one thing for gut and immune health, that would just be to eat fermented food daily. Things like plain yogurt, kimchi, sauerkraut, kefir, low sugar kombucha are all great for microbiome health. Get plenty of fiber, especially from beans and legumes, which I have learned from this podcast episode that they are an undervalued superfood for plant protein and fiber. Channel your food money into quality, not just quantity or convenience. This is because a little goes a long way when properly prepared. And lastly, experiment, adapt, and enjoy. The best diet is the one that works for you in the long term. And that is everything from this podcast summary. Hopefully you could extract some sort of value from it. And let me know what podcast you want me to summarize next. And I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.